Fred Richani. We have right here via Zoom a very special guest. He is the founder and the president of the Palestine Children's Relief Fund. We are honored to be joined by Steve Sosebee. Steve, thank you so much for the time. How are you holding up?
Thanks for asking, and thanks for having me on your show, Fred. I appreciate it. I'm motivated as always by the resilience and the spirit of the Palestinian people, especially those in Gaza. I'm in touch every day and have been going and working there for more than 30 years. Touch every day with people on the ground whose spirit continues despite the genocide and the brutality that they're being subjected to every single day. And I get my energy from them. I mean, obviously, it's quite challenging when you're witnessing from afar, in particular, this graphic, horrendous violence that's being inflicted on this innocent civilian population, particularly children, and running an organization that's, I started it over 30 years ago, dedicated to children, particularly in Gaza, and seeing now so much of what we built destroyed, so many kids that we've treated, killed, or injured, or arrested. And it just is very discouraging from just that human point of view, but the energy and the determination to keep going and to not give up and to not allow what is happening every day to make us feel hopeless or beyond the ability to act in a productive way is based on the spirit and the determination and the resilience of the Gaza people, particularly the young population there who are continuing to try to find hope in what seems to be a relatively hopeless situation.
Absolutely. That is so well said, sir. And I'm sure a lot of people on Instagram in particular have seen the PCRF linked to many profiles and stories and everything, but they don't always get to see the face behind an organization like this. So for anybody that's not completely familiar with the PCRF, can you just get into a little bit of what you guys normally do and what you're currently doing right now with Gaza?
Well, normally, I mean, the organization was started over 30 years ago in the first Intifada with the intention of kind of just taking kids out of Palestine who needed medical care. They were all under occupation. At that time, the West Bank and Gaza were completely occupied by the Israeli military. Today, it continues to be occupied, but in many ways from the outside of controlling the borders and access in and out and so on. At that time, there were literally hundreds of children who needed specialized medical care they couldn't get locally. And what I started to do, I began working in Palestine as a journalist. I started meeting these kids in the field, and over time, started wanting to help some of those who suffered significant injuries, and was able to start placing these kids in hospitals in the U.S. for free. And I found that that was a great way to help these kids who otherwise couldn't get help that they needed. It was also a great way to organize our community abroad who wanted to do more and to support the humanitarian aspect of their people and their cause. It also was a great way to expose Americans to what was happening on the ground there. People were not aware of the other side of the story, so to speak, or the human aspect of the Palestinian people. And to have injured children, some of them without legs, some of them with horrific injuries inflicted by the Israeli military, it was shocking for many Americans. They weren't aware of that. That would turn into an organization that I founded and started to build with my first wife, who was Palestinian. And for 17 years, we worked really hard to build one of the most effective organizations and expand it and to grow it, taken on new projects as the situation on the ground changed, both on who was able to manage and run the hospitals. Once the Palestinian Authority took over running hospitals, we brought in medical teams to start operating. And as the situation deteriorated, the second intifada came, there was a whole different kind of injuries that we hadn't seen before. For the first time, the Israeli military started using tanks and helicopters and artillery and jets to inflict casualties on the Palestinian population. And the first intifada was mainly gunfire. So we started to deal with a lot of new kinds of injuries. And then over the years, as the situation became more complicated, at least from an administrative point of view on the ground, or a political point of view, rather, our organization expanded and continued to take on more projects and programs. When my wife passed away in 2009 from cancer, we started a program to build the first only cancer department in Bethlehem for children. We opened that in April of 2013. Knowing that Gaza has been under siege since 2006 and that children with cancer were having a hard time getting out and getting access to our new department, we opened a brand new center in the Gaza Strip in February of 2019. And have expanded our organization to take on a variety of different programs. So we bring medical teams in to operate and to provide services that are not available on the ground in the public health sector. We continue to bring injured and needy children outside for medical care they cannot get locally. We run a variety of different programs, particularly in Gaza, and mental health, amputee services, orphan sponsorship, and so on and so forth. and including the running of the cancer department up until November 5th when it was hit by an Israeli rocket, and then November 7th when the Israeli military closed the hospital, the pediatric hospital where our department is functioning. It was functioning during the first month of the war, and then had to shut when the Israeli army came and did their campaigns against Gaza hospitals in Gaza City. Um, just briefly, our organization, it's not political. It's not a religious organization. It's focused on the humanitarian needs of kids who are impacted by a political conflict. And our focus is to identify areas that we can have both an immediate impact on a humanitarian level, but also a long-term impact in the health sector. What we've been doing prior to October 7th was really assessing what the needs were in all of the public hospitals in Gaza. We would have teams come in and do assessments and say, well, in the emergency medicine, you need to do this. In orthopedic surgery, you need to do this. These people need trained. You need this equipment. These kids, you need to develop programs to treat children with club feet or hip dysplasia or spinal bifida or scoliosis. You have kids with heart conditions. So what we started to do is really strategically identify gaps in the health sector and then put programs in place that were developing the long-term sustainable support of the health sector so those patients could get treatment locally. Because in Gaza, to leave the Gaza Strip for medical care, you need a permit. And the Israeli military was only issuing, it would fluctuate between 40% to 60 to 70% of the people who applied got permits. So a lot of those patients, particularly some of the very serious ones who needed care outside that they couldn't get locally, would not get permits and in many cases suffer and quite frequently even die. So we wanted to reduce the referrals outside by building up the services locally. And that was one of our strategic plans. Now, after October 7th, obviously that planning is finished. The health system is collapsing. It's almost completely collapsed. Only 8 out of the 36 hospitals are open right now and functioning. And that functioning is basically running as triage and CPR centers. They're not really providing any significant health services simply because they're overwhelmed. They're at 3 times the capacity of what they would normally be, and they were already in a state of excessive capacity. In addition to that, you have exhausted health workers. You have limited medical supplies, equipment, medicines. So we're not able to develop the health sector, obviously, at this time. What we can do and what we are doing and what we're trying to do is respond to the urgent crisis, the acute crisis that is happening on the ground there. I've heard it said, and this is a pretty accurate term, which is this is an acute crisis on top of a chronic crisis, meaning that the acute crisis is the ongoing genocide, the killing, the destruction of the Gaza Strip, which Gaza was in a chronic crisis of siege, closure, and intermediate bombing campaigns that would take place every few months, which had already created a significant humanitarian crisis even before October 7th. So what we're doing now is we're trying to get injured children out for medical care. We're trying to get doctors in to provide medical treatment on the ground. We're trying to get medical supplies in. We're providing humanitarian aid, such as like food. We've provided hospitals with medical equipment and medical supplies and medicine. But obviously that falls far short of what is actually needed. A lot of the aid that we've purchased and procured is sitting in Egypt, waiting to cross in. This is due to the Israeli restrictions. And there's actually hundreds and hundreds of trucks in Egypt just waiting to cross. In the meantime, you have a situation where the entire population is being starved, in addition to a population that is suffering significant trauma, injuries, and trauma and the killings of innocent people by the hundreds every single day. I think it should be noted right here that nearly 10,000 children have been killed in the past 2.5 months. That's 1% of the entire population of children in the Gaza Strip. So anybody who wants to argue the context of what's happening there is or is not considered genocide, or actually it doesn't really matter, whatever you want to call it. 1% of the children in Gaza have been killed since October 7th. So, and that's not talking about those who've been permanently injured, and it's not talking about the kids who've died or are going to die as a result of the health system being destroyed. Kids with heart problems, kids with cancer, kids with basic medical conditions that under normal circumstances, they would go and get dialysis. They would have access to the medication they needed. They would have access to physicians and doctors and primary care that could prevent them from succumbing to the diseases that many of them were born with or acquired over time. So we're not counting those kids. And we're also not counting the kids who are living under conditions which are creating significant health crisis. Children that are living in shelters where they're sharing a toilet with 500, 600, 700 people. Children who are living in rooms with dozens and dozens of people where communicable diseases are flowing through, like chickenpox and respiratory disorders. Those are not being counted in these statistics. The 10,000 children I'm talking about are the children that have had their homes bombed. They've had their schools bombed. They've had their mosques and churches and hospitals bombed where they were seeking shelter and seeking protection. And those are the ones that we're talking about when we're speaking about the casualties, but that's not really an accurate number as to the true casualty figures that have affected and have been inflicted upon the children of the Gaza Strip since October 7th. And what we need to do, what we need to focus on, and you're probably going to get around to asking me this question, but I might jump into it if you don't mind, is what do we do next? What is the response that we have to do as humanitarian organizations, as humanitarians, as a community outside of decent human beings who are shocked from every religion, from the Jewish religion, from Christianity, from Islam, Buddhists, Hindus, atheists, everybody from all walks of life is absolutely shocked and should be shocked by the brutality and inhumanity of this aggression on the Gaza Strip since October 7th. Nothing justifies it. And and in addition to that, as I mentioned before, not only the complete and absolute violence, which has destroyed the complete infrastructure of the Gaza Strip. There's no clean drinking water. It's destroyed the infrastructure of the Gaza Strip to where there's no water sanitation plants. So open human sewage and human waste is running through the streets. There hasn't been electricity in Gaza since October 11th. Children, as I mentioned before, 90% of the population goes at least one day without eating anything for food eating any food. So if you're witnessing this and you're a decent human being and you have morals and ethics and you are raised with a compassionate heart and you see what's happening in Gaza, you have to ask yourself, what can you do? And what are we going to do in the future to show the people in Gaza, the Palestinian people, the rest of the world, that these are not animals, these are not subhumans, they are innocent children who are trying to live in a place that they were born and have not committed any crimes, have not done anything to hurt anyone, and are being murdered and killed and starved in front of the world's eyes. And here we are today talking about it nearly 3 months later, and there's no end in sight.
So well said, and it's such a heartbreaking situation, and everything. And you mentioned it. How are we going to help these people and everything? So let's just say tomorrow, right? There's a permanent, or by the time this interview airs, permanent ceasefire. For PCRF as an organization, what is literally the first step? Is it getting everybody out of the Gaza Strip and getting them proper care and then bringing them back? Is it going to the Gaza Strip? I mean, there's there's just a cornucopia of issues, right? I mean, the amputees, the orphan children, people missing, people under rubble. Like, where do you even start?
Well, that's a great question. Where do you start? I think, we have to start everywhere and see what we can do. We first have to assess what the needs are and what other organizations are doing. There's no point in duplicating. We all have limited resources. The needs are overwhelming. We don't want to duplicate, but we also want to address and focus on and intervene in areas that we can make a significant impact, both immediately and on the long term. So immediately, obviously, you have children with significant injuries. Right now, we are working on those cases to get them out. You also have children who have medical conditions that also need treatment they can't get locally. Prior to October 7th, we had dozens of medical teams coming in to do open heart surgery, to do neurosurgery, to do orthopedic surgery, to do plastic and reconstructive surgery on these children. All of those kids now have to come out for treatment because that treatment is not available to them locally. So that's a big part of it. But even more important and more significant is what we can do to rebuild on the ground there, to rebuild the health sector, to rebuild the education sector, to rebuild the lives of these children who have, in many cases, permanent injuries, need significant stage reconstructive surgery that's going to require years and years of professional surgical intervention and rehabilitation. And we've not talked about two important factors here, which is affecting the entire population of over 1 million children in Gaza. There's two significant factors that I have not addressed yet that need to be addressed significantly by the international community, by aid organizations, and by individuals like you and myself who have a responsibility to move forward and to address these. First is education. The entire education system is shut down. Kids are not going to school. They've not gone to school since October 7th. There's no prospects of them going to school this year. So you're going to have an entire generation. And anybody who knows anything about human development and the development of children, adolescents, and youth is that missing 1 year of school is significant in their development, in their intellectual development, in their social development, in their emotional development. So that's a huge, huge challenge that we need to address and try to address it immediately. Education. Secondly, and even more significant, in my opinion, is the fact that nearly every child in the Gaza Strip is affected by some form of psychological trauma. I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that I would say it's nearly 100% of the children in Gaza are going to show some kind of symptoms of post-traumatic stress disorder. The only challenge or the only issue here is when we say post-traumatic stress is that this is not post-traumatic stress because it's ongoing and current. These are not soldiers returning from a combat area in Ukraine or in Vietnam where they come home to a civilian life and have to adjust. These are children who are continuously subjected to violence, to suffering, to death, to injuries, to destruction, to poverty, to hunger. And this is ongoing. This has been their entire lives. These kids in Gaza have never known peace. They've never known security. They've never known a time where they felt secure in their homes or in their land. So what do we do to help treat these children? Because when you grow up with this severe psychological trauma, it affects your development as an individual to grow into a productive member of a civil society. The world wants the Palestinians to be a civil society, as they claim, and yet they create conditions which make it impossible to develop a civil society. You destroy their infrastructure. You destroy their education system. You keep them under siege for 20 years. You deny them economic growth. You deny them access to the rest of the world. You deny them the ability to be free in their own land. And then you traumatize them through extreme violence. And then you expect them to be members of a so-called civilized global community. It's impossible. And that, again, is something we need to take into consideration. Now, again, the question is, you asked me, what are we going to do? Well, first, we identify areas that we can have an impact, can have an immediate impact, provide medical care, provide urgent humanitarian aid, food, water, clothing, shelter, hygiene, medication, medical supplies, medical equipment, relieve the physicians that are exhausted and collapsing in the local health system, rebuild the health system up north. And this, again, depends on what is Gaza going to look like. If it ended today and the Israeli army withdrew and we were back to the borders of Gaza from October 6th, then we would have an idea of what we could do. But we don't know where this is going to end or when it's going to end, what Gaza will look like, who will be the ruling authority on the ground that we have to work with when it comes to health services and humanitarian aid. Nobody knows the answer to those questions. Nobody's even talking about them. There's some, occasional discussions about, well, Hamas is this, or the PA is that, or the United Nations is going to come in and run things. But nobody's seriously had any discussion about who's going to run Gaza when the day comes that this situation is over. So it's very hard to have a planning scenario in which you can come in and say, I'm going to do this program on the ground to rebuild this hospital or rebuild this institution, when you don't know when it's over, what it's going to look like, and who you're going to be able to work with on the ground to start working and being able to have access to and the authority to do the type of humanitarian aid that is required to respond to this terrible crisis. Now, that's not to say that we don't know exactly what we need to do and the programs that need to be put into place. We definitely know that in the health sector, everything needs to be done, from rebuilding the physical structure to relieving the exhausted medical personnel locally, to providing medical equipment and medical supplies, and providing treatment for patients on the ground who are coming in and require urgent care, reconstructive care, and so on. That's absolutely necessary. In the education system, the same thing. You have to rebuild the physical structures like you do in the health sector. You need to rebuild the opportunity for children. You have to rebuild the structures. 60% of the homes in Gaza are destroyed. So where are these kids going to live when they go to school? Where are they going to come back home and study? Where are they going to come back home and do their homework? Those answers need to be questioned as well. It needs to be addressed as well. Shelter is required. We need to bring in shelter, temporary shelter, till the infrastructure is rebuilt. And you talk about long-term needs. As I mentioned before, all of these children are traumatized. We need to come up with ways that we can address the significant psychological trauma that these children, the anxiety, the fear that these children live with every single day, and give them opportunities to get their childhood back, or at least some semblance of it. Many of them have never had a childhood, but at least some semblance of security so they can live and not be constantly in this state of acute anxiety and fear as they have been since October 7th.
100%. And we're all very grateful that an organization like yours exists to help all these children. And yes, it is crazy to even figure out where to start, but we were all grateful for the amazing work you and your team are doing. Steve, you've been so gracious with your time. We thank you so much. Before we let you go, Where can we find the PCRF online to learn more about volunteering and donating? And in terms of any upcoming events, where can we find you next?
The organization is PCRF.net. That's on the web. You can find all the information about how to donate and how to get involved with the organization. Where you'll find me, I'm planning to go into Gaza sometime in early January to assess on the ground what the situation is firsthand and to come back with clear planning based on what those assessments determine we are capable and able to do, given the conditions on the ground. So just you can follow me on social media, Instagram and all those other places, Twitter, and I'll be happy to share the updates on what we're doing and getting people more involved, because this is going to take a true community response. Can't be left to others to do what we have to do. It can't be left to the other governments to do things that we as individuals, as people who have hearts and minds and passion to help others. That's our responsibility to respond to this crisis. So I hope others will come forward and say, I want to be involved. I want to use whatever time, effort, energy I can to serve those children in Gaza and give them an opportunity to live better lives. And I'm going to give everybody an opportunity to be involved in that in the coming weeks and months. So just get in touch, follow me on social media and you'll see what the plans are coming up.
Amazing, Steve. Thank you so much. Bonus question. Is there anything else you would like to address before we let you go?
Oh, gosh. Well, I mean, look, I think it's easy to be very pessimistic about what's happening on the ground there and to feel a sense of hopelessness. And I think, all of us feel these mixed emotions at the same time. You fluctuate between complete despair and depression if you're watching, small children being dug out from rubble and missing limbs, and parents losing their fingernails digging in a pile of dirt trying to get to try to find their children. And you just see these scenes over and over again every single day, and it makes you deeply, deeply depressed about humanity, about life in general, about what's happening on the ground there, but also angry and full of rage and these really extreme emotions. And what we're not feeling is any sense of hope. And what I want to give, hopefully, everybody who's watching is that we can bring hope back to this issue. We have to stop letting politicians create these conditions in which, on all sides, in which violence is a tool of human relations. Violence is a tool of conflict resolution. Violence is a tool of human interaction. It's over. Those days are gone. This is 2023, 2024. It's time for us as human beings to take over this issue and start putting the human aspect of service, of compassion, of healing, of love, and of positive interaction that's going to make a profound change in the lives of these children. That's the only thing that's going to work. So there is a sense of hope when we take the control of this issue and we impose on this issue a human element of compassion and love and healing. And that's what I'm going to bring to this issue, have been bringing for 30 years, going to do even more. I'm more committed than ever to serving the people of Palestine, particularly the children of Gaza. And I hope everybody will join me.
Amazing, Steve. On behalf of everyone here at TSC and MNN, thank you and the PCRF so much for everything you do. And we wish you all, and of course, all the children, the families affected, the very best.
God bless you. Thank you so much.
Special thanks to PCRF contributor Seema Gulati for setting up this interview.